Any fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm knows that the show works so well because there's essentially no script.
You know, if I'm saying something to you, I don't say to you, I'm gonna say something to you, and then say it, I just say it.
The actors show up, are given a prompt, and they work it out from there with improvisation. It makes sense for the show. However, modern day blockbusters, with the, $200 million budget with massive stunts that can only be done in one take? Yeah, you better know your lines.
You guys all read the script, right?
I don't read script reads me.
Apparently, that's a lot to ask though. Let's take a look at some actors that really couldn't remember the script.
Oh, sorry, I can't remember anything today.
Tom Cruise has rightfully earned the title of Hollywood stuntman. Whether it's hanging off the side of a moving plane, scaling the world's tallest building, or even in real life dogfighting, Tommy Boy is always ready to get his adrenaline pumping. It's during filming for Days of Thunder that Tom faced one of his greatest challenges yet, learning his lines. To be fair, the behind the scenes of this movie was messy. Scripts were constantly being rewritten, even during filming, so Tom had a lot on his mind when he came to set. Of course, because Tom Cruise is, he's Tom Cruise, he valiantly protested that he would be the one in the driver's seat, even though the movie itself features plenty of NASCAR alumni. You've probably heard about the dangers of texting and driving, but it seems that the issue of reading a script and driving is seldomly brought up.
Don't do it! What are you, crazy?
To keep Tom in the know of his lines as he was cruising during filming, the production team came up with an absolutely revolutionary method. By revolutionary, I mean the absolute most makeshift workaround possible. They just taped the script to the dashboard. As one would expect, staring at your lines while trying to keep a speed of 175 miles per hour isn't the best idea, and Tom Cruise ended up getting into an accident on set because of it. Thankfully, no one was badly injured, and that forced the rework of the system, where instead they used the built-in audio from the racing helmets, which really begs the question, why wasn't this done in the first place? Similar to Days of Thunder, the production of Sherlock Holmes was under constant rewrites, and like Cruise, this ended up causing some headaches for Robert Downey Jr. To alleviate the ever-changing script issues, they gave Downey an earpiece to feed him the lines. Now, this would be a neat little behind-the-scenes story if it ended after that production wrapped, but it didn't. Listen, I love RDJ as Tony Stark as much as the next guy, but not only did Downey refuse to wear the costumes while earning like a $50 million plus payday during the Avengers movies, but he himself has admitted to not learning his lines.
I have practically zero regard for what is physically printed on the pages.
He talked to the big dog Kevin Feige to get an earpiece for the Avengers sequels, but even with the lines being read to him, he still changed up the script after every single take. It's a good thing that RDJ is essentially just Tony Stark in real life, or else this would have caused an absolute train wreck to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Those original Pirates movies are absolute gold. The sets, effects, score, it's all working together to create some perfect swashbuckling tales. Arguably, the most important asset to all these films is Johnny Depp. The aloof Jack Sparrow was hands down perfect casting. I really can't see anyone ever replacing that role, not even Mads Mikkelsen. The lawsuit launched against Depp by his former management team released a lot of behind-the-scenes secrets, namely that he had some pretty radical spending habits, like spending over $30,000 a month on wine.
Why is the rum always gone?
It seems that all the drinking led to Johnny not being able to memorize his lines, as another high expense from the actor was $100,000 paid to a sound engineer to feed him lines during the later Pirates films. Which, yeah, you know what? That totally explains his entire performance in Dead Men Tell No Tales. The story doesn't end there, though. Johnny himself has refuted the statements, saying that while he did spend that much money on a sound engineer, the noises being fed to him weren't his lines, but actually weird and obscure noises to throw him off his game. $100,000 for a dude to hit a soundboard? Mr. Depp, don't worry. I do it for you for free. Listen to this.
That was smashing. I'll do this with my hands.
Johnny's defense is that he was inspired by the eye acting from the silent film stars and that the startling noises helped him emote that. But come on, Johnny, let's be honest, that's not a real excuse. Then we have the absolute godfather of refusing lines. Well, that is the godfather himself, Marlon Brando. Allegedly, he has never once learned his lines for any of the movies he starred in. But why? He thought that when he learned a line, it would come off as rehearsed, and felt that the spur-of-the-moment cue card readings would come off as genuine. I would argue that learning your lines is a thing called acting, but Brando won like 2 Academy Awards, and I'm currently in my mother's basement, so fair enough. Francis Ford Coppola notoriously didn't want Marlon Brando in The Godfather because of how hard he was to work with behind the scenes. But he gave him an audition anyways, since none of the actors that had auditioned for Don Vito Corleone satisfied him. Brando showed up an hour and a half late and still managed to win the role. The payoff to all of this is that now there's images of legendary actors Robert Duvall and James Caan being strapped with cue cards across their chests, so that's just great. Honestly, I can't remember what I had for dinner last night, so to expect a preteen Tom Felton to know his lines while trying to be one of the leads in the wizarding world is absolute blasphemy. Luckily, this line memorization flub ended up being one of the most quoted scenes of the entire saga. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Draco says,
"Reading? I didn't know you could read."
The script actually called for Tom to finish the line without the "I didn't know you can read," and instead ask Ron why he weaseled into the frame. In the moment, Tom drew a blank at what he was supposed to say to Rupert Grint, and essentially solidified why Tom Felton was perfectly cast as Draco Malfoy right then and right there. So far, the examples have had at least some explanation behind them. But what about when you have to perform the lines that you yourself wrote in a movie that you yourself are directing? It would be pretty hard to mess that up. Unless, of course, you're Tommy Wiseau. The Room has gone on to being infamously titled the worst movie of all time. And while it probably isn't, it is easy to understand why people say it is. Every bit of it is a mess. The acting's horrible, and it just looks rushed and amateur. Looking at a simple scene like this,
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not.
one would assume that was done in one take and then they moved on. But that's not the case. Tommy had to complete a whopping 32 takes to get the line out, and by the time he finally said it, the entire crew overrode Tommy's direction and forced the scene to move on. Like this list. Let's keep it going. Watching Some Like It Hot nowadays just brings you back to the silver age of Hollywood. Oh, what a classic time. Now with TMZ and social media, we're constantly hearing about behind the scenes secrets. Back then, when there was like, 4 TV channels, everything seemed okay. The key word there, obviously, is seemed. By 1959, the Hollywood princess Marilyn Monroe's life was in shambles. Facing a rocky marriage filled with miscarriages along with drug and alcohol abuse, Marilyn's life wasn't as star-studded as it seemed. This bled deeply in her time on set. For example, take this simple scene.
Where's that bourbon?
That took 40 takes to get. 8 more than it took what some would consider the worst actor of all time to say a much longer line. Of course, the movie came out to critical acclaim, specifically for Monroe's performance, but it just goes to show that things aren't always the way they seem. Even just considering being in a Marvel movie makes me lightheaded.
I don't feel so good.
Turns out, it's the same for A-list actors as well. When seasoned actor Jake Gyllenhaal entered the wall of blue screens to film Spider-Man Far From Home, the actor got quickly overwhelmed by the size of it all. When filming a scene with Tom Holland and Samuel L. Jackson, Jake ended up freezing with anxiety from the pressure of working within the machine that is the MCU. After a few botched takes, Jake took Tom aside and asked him for some acting advice. I'm just paraphrasing here, but he essentially quoted T. Swift saying, "You need to calm down." So far, we've had an entire list of people that didn't care enough to learn their lines. It's interesting to see someone caring too much. Robert Pattinson has led one of the most interesting careers currently in Hollywood, being able to flourish in plenty of indie flicks, but the Twilight Saga, that was not the Batman we were looking for. Robert has been very vocal about how much he hated filming those movies.
Most of these fans probably know the movies better than you do.
Definitely. I'm struggling with character names.
Turns out he hated them so much that he didn't even learn the lines. Robert himself has stated that following the Twilight series, he was a little shell-shocked about memorizing lines because he was so used to the production team just feeding them to him. 30 Rock has been called an institution of comedy for good reason. Pretty much every comedic great and, well, really every other talented individual has performed on Saturday Night Live. The process of making an SNL episode is a rocket. From pitches to live recordings, there is less than a week, and during that time, plenty of rewrites are made and entire sketches are cut. That's why SNL has relied on cue cards since Lorne Michaels and crew began in the 70s. Interestingly enough, there is an entire art behind the cue cards. The team takes great pride in spacing of the letters and the color coordination of the lines to ensure that there are as few mishaps on live television as possible. There are usually 3 card stacks, one on stage left, one on stage right, and one in front of the audience, which explains why the actors are always looking in awkward directions. Then we have Bruce Willis. When he took on The Great White Way in a production of Misery, he decided to go off-book. And by off-book, I mean just straight up refused to learn the lines. He had every single line fed in through an earpiece, and as you probably would expect, he was absolutely panned for this performance.